Hello, and welcome to
Week two
of
Looking at the Book
Chapter
of Ruth.
2.
Yeah. And beautiful sunshine and birds singing.
And actually, the tractor has stopped.
I don't know, it started again now. But you probably can't hear that, so hopefully that won't be distracting. So we are our second week of looking at Ruth. Last week we looked at chapter 1.
So chapter 1 was about the tragedy that was taking place. Ruth and her husband had left Bethlehem.
Yeah, because of a famine. They go to Moab with their 2 sons.
Unfortunately, the husband dies and the two
sons die, but leaving their Moabitess wives, so Naomi's daughter-in-laws, behind. So we have this situation. One goes back to her family in Moab, and her gods and her family to start life all over again. But Ruth, who is a Moabitess, says, "No, Naomi, there's something about you. You're this horrible tragedy and you're in so much pain." And Naomi talks about that. But Ruth says, "No, I'm staying with you. There's something about you and your God. I want to give my life to your God, to you, to your people, and until death, essentially." And so they start to travel. They travel back to Bethlehem and they arrive just as the barley harvest is beginning.
Which is my favourite verse.
The stage is set for the next act of the story. So we have this book is really good. The last verse of every chapter and the first verse of every chapter are really significant in setting the scene. So we've got chapter 2, verse 1. If you've got a Bible or a Bible app on your phone,
you can see the link below.
Yeah, we'd love you to look at that and read it with us now. So it says, "Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz." So Boaz.
So Boaz. So we have this new character. It enters into the scene.
Yeah.
So in relation to that verse, for me, there's the relative.
Yeah.
Is the Hebrew word is goel, and it means to redeem.
Yeah, it's really close to the word to redeem.
They were part of this group of the clan who would help rescue relatives who were in trouble of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea of a relative under the Mosaic law would have been that they could help or rescue or redeem a family or a situation because they were related, and that was part of the law that God had given to his people. So actually the word relative is really like a hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's hope, there's family, and that means hope. Which is really exciting.
And then the man of standing, the Hebrew word often renders it here as, or it could be in a variety of ways, a man of valour or fighting man, or it could be a person of ability or a person of wealth. So this is somebody.
There's somebody. It's not just anybody.
Yeah, you want to hang out with this guy.
Yeah, there's something about him, and we're going to see so much more of his character as we go through this chapter and the next ones.
And as we looked in the last one, Boaz means a man of strength.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, should we talk a little bit about what happens?
Yeah. So the summary of the chapter is that Ruth then wants to support Naomi because Naomi can't do the work.
They have nothing. Yeah.
So she then goes and says, "Can I go out into the fields and help out?" Yeah.
So that's the important thing to understand is that again, under God's law that He'd given to Moses, His whole law was set up to protect family, to protect the poor, to provide this sense of where someone could be redeemed that had been lost. And so one of the things was about when the harvest came, they were to gather up the harvest and they would tie it into bundles. But because everything was done by hand, there were lots of bits that were left over. And the law said that they weren't allowed to go and pick those up. They had to leave them for the poor.
Amazing.
To come and glean is the word, to glean those things that have been left over so that they too could benefit from the harvest. And so Ruth says that she will go out and she goes and picks a field and she starts to collect things. And
that field just happens to be
a field that belongs to Boaz.
And for me, that's very much God providing for her. God has led her to this field.
And we know when we read the significance of that because we've just been introduced to Boaz, and so we know something's going to happen here because she's gone to the field and it happens to be Boaz's field, who is now her relative as she's married into that family. So it's really exciting. We get this scene to be set, and then Boaz arrives from Bethlehem.
Well, that's the next bit, isn't it? Because then the next line, verse 4 says, "Just then."
Yeah, and it's like, ooh, just happened, just coincidence. And of course, one of the things that we see throughout this book although God isn't mentioned as in speaking to them necessarily doing things, is we see God at work,
interwoven within the
that he actually is setting these up. It's his plan for them that happens at his providence, and that's really exciting. It's exciting for us, isn't it, that we can sort of go through and think, oh, that was really good, or oh, well, it's great that happened, and actually we need to start recognizing that those are God's hand at work in our lives every single day, because they're not accidents, they are God incidents.
Yeah,
it's just
absolutely.
Like happened here for Ruth, where she just happens to be in Boaz's field.
So then Boaz asks the questions about her, who she is, what she's doing.
Yeah.
She then he then gives her food and supports her, and then
and
protects her.
He says, don't go away from here.
Yeah.
Stay here. I've told my men not to touch you. And you are to go and have a drink of water when you want one from the water that the men have filled. And so Boaz is so generous to her. He doesn't need to do any of that. His only obligation under the law is to let her pick up some grain. And yet he goes so much further. He says to her, my daughter, which didn't mean that she was his daughter, but meant that it was just a term of saying, I'm going to treat you with care and with consideration, in that sense. And he's so generous to her. He offers her drinks of water. He puts her under the protection of his own staff. And she bows down and she says, why have I found such favour in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?
And that's quite key,
Yeah.
because the way that the writer has put that, actually what the writer's trying to say is that you've noticed the unnoticed.
Yeah.
That usually you wouldn't notice the foreigner.
Yeah, and her sense that she doesn't really have a right to be there, or that perhaps she feels she doesn't have a right to be there, or certainly not for his notice and his generosity and his care that he has already spoken of. And so we have this really beautiful sense of this Boaz is noticing her, but also that he then says, I have heard about you and how you have come with your mother-in-law from Moab, and that you have stayed with her. And so her loyalty, her faithfulness, where she says to Ruth, I'm going to be faithful, where you die, I will die, where you go, your God will be my God. And she gives up her old life, her old gods, and she says, no, I commit to the God of Israel and to you, Naomi.
What do you think of where he says, because he then goes into a whole blessing, doesn't he? He says, may the Lord repay you. And I think that's amazing in the sense that, like you're saying, that she said, actually I want to follow you, Naomi, I want, your God to be my God. And actually, he then says, the
blessing of our God be on you. And he blesses her over and over.
May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge.
Yeah.
Relating to Psalm 36:7, 57:1, and 61:4.
Yeah, about taking refuge under the wings of God. And so we have this beautiful picture where he has such respect for her and her loyalty to Naomi, and then we see his character, that he's so generous. He goes above and beyond his obligation to just let her pick grain in the field, and he recognises her as a kinsman, as a family member, and is so generous to her.
And that kind of demonstrates why he was somebody of high standing.
Yeah.
He was somebody. It wasn't just the fact that he had money, but actually the character of the guy was amazing. Like I said, he was somebody you would want to hang out with.
And it's really interesting as well, isn't it? We live in these times where people are travelling all over the world, not currently obviously, but we have a lot of people who've moved into England, and they are foreigners in a sense, and they're trying to glean from our system and our world, our culture, just something for themselves. They've come with nothing very often. Refugees or economic refugees, they come with nothing, and yet we have this beautiful demonstration of God through Boaz, of his heart to be generous to these people, and this pattern that we too should be following God's generosity, Boaz's generosity, and we're encouraged later in other places in the Bible, aren't we, to be generous, and we see such a beautiful picture of what that looks like here as well.
So then all this takes place. She then ends up collecting 23 litres.
Yeah,
which is amazing.
Way more than anybody would normally just pick up in a day, because Boaz has said to his staff, leave some extra bits. Don't tell.
To put it into context, as a side note, it's the same amount that David delivered to his 3 brothers
when they were
just before the battle with Goliath.
Yeah. So it's a really big amount of grain. And then she goes back home, and Boaz, having said, don't go to anyone else's field, stay in mine, stay until the end of the harvest and everything else. She goes back to Naomi. Naomi's like, how did you get this much grain? Where were you that someone has given you such favour?
And there's this hope, this is like excitement starting to build up. It's like, what is going on here?
And then we get this pivot point, because Ruth says, I was in the field belonging to Boaz. And I just imagine Naomi's face must have just lit up when she says that. And Naomi says, the Lord bless him. And I love how we've seen her bless her daughters-in-law in the midst of pain and trial and emptiness in the chapter before. And again, Boaz has blessed Ruth, and now Naomi is blessing Boaz. And she says, the Lord bless him. He's not stopped showing his kindness. That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsmen redeemers. So we get again that the potential of hope again. Oh, he's been so kind to you. He's been so generous to you. You just happened to be in his field. That's amazing. He's someone who could redeem our family property, redeem our family line, because of the way that the law is set up. And so Ruth stays in Boaz's fields. She gleans until the barley and the wheat harvest are finished, and all that time she lives with her mother-in-law Naomi. So we have this sense of this chapter is all about the harvest. But it's about there's good things grown, and there's good things being taken in, and
we've got it's a complete different
the emptiness
feel.
of chapter 1 and now the fullness of the harvest and Ruth's abundance because of Boaz's generosity to her, and his generosity to her because of her loyalty to Naomi.
So what things did you feel came out of that chapter then for you? What kind of stood out for you?
One of the things I love is that God had set it all up so many years before when he gave the law to Moses, to God's people. And I think we can be quite, in our modern culture, and be like, oh, the law, we don't want to know. But actually, God's law, in the way that he gave it to his people before it was distorted by the Pharisees and made to be a burden, was such a beautiful gift to them for redemption from their own sin, from tragedy, from loss, from emptiness in this situation, and also as provision for the poor, provision for the widow, provision for the orphan. And that God set all of that up because that is his heart for how we should live with one another. And that's still his heart for how we should live with one another, with our own natural families, but also with our church family. That is his picture of how we should live. And I just think it's so beautiful because it's so integral to this story. But it was all set up by God. It was his heart.
You can see actually if you look on the Apostle Paul speaking to the Macedonian churches. Yeah, he says
when Paul speaks.
In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. Yeah, and he encouraged them, didn't he, to excel in the grace of giving.
Yeah,
isn't that amazing?
Where Naomi is in such pain and sorrow, and yet she blesses. She wants to be generous to her daughters-in-law, and Boaz is so generous to Ruth, and I just think I just love that is God's heart, and that is so integral to the story, to how it works. It's God's generosity, it's God's plan for redemption, it's God's love of loyalty and faithfulness to Naomi, but to himself, and that's how he longs for us to be with him. So I just love that. What about you?
I think that's the thing that was for me that came out was that last verse. So we go, I always look at the last verse being significant, whereas in the last one it was about the fact that we're going to the harvest. This one is the fact that actually the harvest is finished. And so often we can have good things that take place in our life, and then they end, and it's like, well,
you just feel a bit
what happens next? And if where Naomi was feeling, she was in this situation with pain and trauma was taking place. It's like, well, God, what are you doing? This can't,
And then something good happens. You're like, oh well, that was really good. Oh, but it's finished now.
And how quick? I know how quick are we to forget God's provision for our lives
and to not be faithful to him. Yeah, absolutely. So the scene is set for the next instalment of the story, which we will look at next week. You can of course read ahead. It's very exciting, but we're just really just loving all of those things that we learn about God and his character through these characters and this beautiful story that is playing out in the fields.
Yeah, brilliant.
Enjoy discussions in Connect Group, or look at those resources yourself. If you're not in a Connect Group, we'd love you to take a look at our website and have a go and just try one out.
Come and join in the conversation.
It'd be great.
Have a great week.
Bye guys.
Bye. Hi guys, it's so good to have you this morning, whether it be on Facebook or on Zoom. We are Hemel Vineyard Church, and we're just doing life together as we follow Jesus. If you want to be part of that journey, then feel free to come and join us, whether it be on Zoom, again on Facebook next week, or drop us a line and have a conversation with us. We'd love to hear from you. Another place you can find out what's going on would be to check out our website, which is www.hemelvineyard.org.uk. I pray this week that you would know Jesus' love and his presence with you in whatever you face. See you next week. Bye.